Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday evening meeting for the Westborough Board of Selectmen. It is August 18th, 2020, and this meeting is being held remotely. I will read the famous disclaimer that we've all become comfortable with. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law C-30A, Section 18, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Westborough Board of Selectmen will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public in or parties with a right in or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Westborough's website at town.westborough.ma.us. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch the meeting may do so in the following manner: through Westborough TV, through their YouTube channel, or on Verizon 28 Charter Channel 192. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of Westborough's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Okay, I'll take a minute to go through the agenda, and then I'll have Vice Chair Edinburgh read through the openings on the town boards and committees. So we'll start off our meeting this evening with a municipal vulnerability preparedness planning grant public listening session that will be presented by Peter Peliquin of CMRCP. And since we love acronyms, that stands for Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission. At 6 o'clock, we may or may not need that full hour, but at 6 o'clock, we're scheduled to have approval of meeting minutes. 6:05, discussion vote for alteration, applications for alteration of premises for outdoor dining. At 6:10, request to appoint Julie Squires to Public Safety Committee. 6:15, presentation regarding the upcoming election processes and procedures by our town clerk. At 6:30, we'll have a discussion vote to sign the election warrant for the state primary and town clerk, by the town clerk, excuse me. At 6:35, discussion vote regarding naming of the pickleball courts by our Recreation Director, Jennifer Kirkland. 6:45, item number 8, we are passing over for those that were on the agenda that was on there inadvertently. And the reason why we're not doing it is that the selectmen do not review subdivisions. So folks are wondering why we wouldn't be presenting that. So that was on there by error. Item number 9 at 7 p.m. will be a presentation regarding the revised capital plan policy. At 7:20, discussion vote, right of first refusal for 112 Deacon Shattuck Way by our town manager. We will be passing over item number 11, which was an amendment to the purchase and sale for 31 to 333 Eli Whitney Street. That's not necessary. Item number 12, 7:35 p.m., discussion vote, approve proposed legislation for acquisition off of the Oak Street parcel. We'll be passing over item number 13, which was a discussion vote regarding the purchase and sale agreement for 30 Belknap. At 7:50, we'll have our town manager report. At 8 o'clock p.m., we'll have issues and correspondence from the selectmen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Edinburgh to review openings on town boards and committees.
Okay, good afternoon and evening, everyone. We have a number of openings on various town boards and committees. As always, if you're interested, let us know. Our town runs on the energy of our volunteer boards and committees in many respects. Openings on town manager appointed committees, we have 2 members on the ad hoc committee, which is for cable TV advisory. A constable, 1 position, it's a 1-year term. 3 members of indefinite term for the Diversity Inclusion Committee, 1 position, it's an annual term for Insect and Pest Control Officer, a 1-year term for the Measurer of Wood, and 2 members for 3-year terms of the Municipal Building Committee. For boards and committees appointed by the Board of Selectmen, we have 3 positions for the Community Preservation Act Exploratory Committee, one member, a 3-year term for the Council on Aging, one non-voting member for a 3-year term for the Country Club Operating Committee, 12 members, 3-year terms for the Cultural Council. The Historical Commission has an opening on a 3-year term for one non-voting member. The Housing Partnership Committee has an opening for a 3-year term for one member. I believe at an upcoming meeting, we will be making that appointment. The Open Space Preservation Committee has an opening for one member with a 3-year term. The Recreation Committee has an opening for one non-voting member for a 3-year term. The Senior Disabled Taxation Aid Committee is looking for 2 members. That's an indefinite term. The Trustees of Soldiers Memorial has 2 openings, 1 voting and one non-voting member. Those are both 3-year terms. The Veterans Advisory Board has an opening for 1 member with a 1-year term. The Youth Commission is looking for 1 adult member on a 3-year term. For moderator appointed committees, the Walk Up Robinson Fund Committee has a 3-year term opening for 1 member.
Thank you very much, Alan. And just one note regarding the Diversity Inclusion Committee. That committee did meet and will be adding 3 members. We had like 10 apply, which was fantastic. So we have a meeting tomorrow, and preempting my issues and correspondence, but I did want to let folks know, if you are interested, you're always welcome to attend those meetings. But there may be something else that is of interest. So thanks for reading those. Okay, with that, Christy, what do you, if you would please, or Chris, we have our Director of DPW, Chris Paint, on with us as well this evening to introduce the first topic.
I think Kim's actually going to introduce the first topic.
I'm so sorry, our Assistant Town Manager, Kim.
That's okay. No, that's
like
okay. I would have jumped in there. I would have jumped in there.
300 batting average.
So, so tonight we have Pete Peliquin from Central Mass Regional Planning to walk us through our progress to date in our efforts to become a certified or designated municipal vulnerability community, MVP community. MVP is municipal vulnerability preparedness. The state has allocated a significant amount of money both for this planning phase, planning grant phase, as well as later action grants to support municipalities in their efforts to plan for climate change resiliency. So one of the primary work products of this planning grant phase that we are in is a vulnerability assessment. So Pete will spend, I think, the better portion of his presentation talking about that, which was really the outcome of a 1-day workshop held back in February. When I was thinking back, it was mid-February. Our biggest concern at that point was that the roads were a little sloppy that morning. So a few of us were delayed in getting in because of sloppy road conditions. I'll take it any day at this point. But one of the things, the grant was awarded last summer. We initially had a 12-month period to complete the work. Because of COVID, the state did extend the deadlines. We were able to, we had the bulk of the work done, but then it was an issue of meetings and being able to get everything pulled together to get to this point tonight. We expect that after the presentation tonight, there'll be some minor tweaks to the draft document, and hopefully by mid-September, we'd be submitting this to the state, get our designation, which then would allow us to apply for grants to actually fund projects. The next grant round would likely be next spring. So I don't want to steal too much of his thunder, so I think I'll just turn it over to Pete Peliquin.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great summary, great introduction. You didn't steal all the thunder, but you definitely highlighted all the key points of what we're here for tonight. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to come to speak to the board as well as the town of Westborough. And I'm going to bring us through essentially a year of work, and I'm going to try to do that in a relatively short amount of time. A lot of efforts were put into this planning process, and a lot of information was collected, and there's a lot of different key points that came out of it that maybe necessarily weren't foreseen in the beginning, but I think there's some steps that have been implemented already since COVID. So I guess with that, I should share my screen so everybody can see what I'm seeing. I don't want to forget to do that. Yes. Like this.
Successful
Okay.
share. If you can just put that in, there you go. Thank you very much.
Everything's good on your end?
Looks great. Thank you.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so as Kim said, we're here to kind of give a summary and overview of the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. This is one part of a series of parts throughout the planning process, and this is the public listening session, information session. A little bit more in depth on what is MVP, and it's the state grant program designed to support cities and towns to begin the planning of the planning process for climate resiliency. The four big parts of the process is the CRB workshop, which is the Community Resiliency Building Workshop, and that's what Kim touched on earlier. That was held back in February. The report is in progress right now. The listening session, that's today. That's kind of the public portion of this, whereas the workshop was invitation only. And then the final step would be in reporting by the core team. It was also mentioned that once we complete the planning process and we submit that report to the state then approves it in Westborough, then becomes an MVP community. And the key to the MVP community certification is that you now become eligible for MVP action grants. Typically, action grants come out in the spring. We'll get more into that a little bit later after we get through the process. But just as an overview, you can see we're around 85% of the state is certified at this point. An RFR just closed 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure the state's probably going to be pushing closer to 90%. So when we think about competitive grant programs, when we're thinking about action grants, right now we're competing close to 90% of the state. The nice thing about that is it's an in-state program. When we think of like a FEMA grant, you're competing nationally, right? So a lot harder to get those monies. So kind of the overview of the process is it's a community-driven process. So it's more what is going to fit the town. Who does the town want there? Who do we want to bring into this workshop, right? That was led by the project coordinator, Kim Foster. We had a core team also of town officials, department heads. The Concom was in there. Members of DPW, planning board was in there. So we had a pretty diverse crew, core team, and we met 3 times in person when that was still a thing. Seems like a thing of the past, but we met in October, November, December, and this was very logistical meetings, kind of getting the core team to understand what the entire process is going to look like, the roles and responsibilities. Over the course of those 3 or 4 months, we were thinking about who do we want to invite? What is the most diverse group we can get into the room all at once, who typically may or may not have been involved or in the room at the same time? We also had a few conference calls prior to the meeting. Like Kim said, the day of the meeting, there was I don't know if I want to call it a snowstorm, but there was some snow on the ground, and that was discussed at length prior to. So we moved forward with that on February 6th. We had 28 people attending. That does not include the 10 that CMRPC brought. It ranged all the way from members of the select board to community nonprofit groups, officials from schools, committees, businesses. There was a very diverse group in the room. And then kind of the final piece before the report gets submitted is the listening session in today, and that's kind of to inform everyone on what process we went through, what were some of the discussions, what were some of the findings. So the workshop objectives, so the actual day of the workshop back in February, we were trying to define the extreme weather and climate-related hazards that affect Westborough. As part of the grant program, we're to pick 4. We chose extreme temperatures, flooding, winter storms, and high wind events. Kind of much larger buckets. of hazards that could impact the town. We want to identify the current and future vulnerabilities and strengths, develop prioritized actions for the community, businesses, stakeholders, nonprofits, essentially anyone who does some sort of business, whether it's financial or an exchange of services within the town. We also want to identify opportunities to advance those actions. So thinking about what can we do to improve on the vulnerabilities and what can we do to improve on what is already a strength and how to strengthen that. So that was more forward thinking towards the action grant side and moving forward in time. The three bigger categories that we worked in were the infrastructure, societal, and environmental. So that was thinking about what is a feature within one of those big broad brushstrokes of a category, right? We can think of infrastructure as a culvert, a dam, a retaining wall, right? Something like that. But we could also think of infrastructure and lines of communication, whether it's interdepartmental or actual hardwired communication lines. In society, we're thinking about what's the effect on the people, right? A town with no people is really nothing. So what are the features that we have when we're thinking of people and societal impacts? And then environment. So thinking about, a lot of discussion was talked about Cedar Swamp, right? So thinking about wetlands, lakes, rivers, even things such as like road salts and how those impact the environment. Like I said before, the forest hazards that we discussed were kind of stayed within those categories with extreme temps, flooding, winter storms, and high wind events. And we went with kind of a larger picture, if you will. When we're thinking of extreme temps, you can go either way. I know the slide kind of indicates heat, but we can think about periods of drought with extreme temperatures as well as periods of below freezing temperatures. And flooding can be any kind of flooding, a flash flood, river flood, stream flood, localized flooding. Winter storms, too, is the same thing. We can't just really say snow anymore, right? Now things seem to be going from what used to be a snowstorm to now a rain, ice, snow event, or in the reverse, where it might snow, turn to freezing rain, and then rain. And then high wind events would kind of catch all your hurricanes, tornadoes. I don't really know what to call it, but the storm not this past February, the one before, where it's a sunny, partly cloudy day, but it's blowing 70 miles an hour. Right. So those are the broader categories we were looking for when we were thinking about hazards. And before we got going, we gave a little bit of climate projections. This is all vetted through the state, and the state requires that we use this data. So to kind of get people thinking, you know, as you can see by the diagram here, we're thinking 40, 50, 60, 70 years out, right? So with the heat projections, it's kind of projected of an increase of 8 to 29 days annually, so over 90-degree days. When we kind of put that into ways that I personally can understand it a little better, is we could think of essentially the entire month of July will be over 90 by 2050. And then we look out beyond that to around the turn of the century. Now we're looking at anywhere between 11 and 70 days of over 90 degrees. And to help me understand that a little better too, that's essentially all of June, all of July, all of August will now be over 90 degrees, right? What are the impacts going to be like of that? You know, what are our grandchildren or our great grandchildren? What are the problems that they are going to be dealing with? And can we kind of think about that now and try to look that far into the future? Not an easy task, but great minds in the room did prevail. So this is kind of showing how the forest is projected to change. And at first glance, it seems a little bit messy, but when you kind of go from what is now on the left to what is projected in at the turn of the century, we're looking at a much more kind of maple birch, that kind of forest, right? Where the pines and the oaks and acorns and things like that are going to move out. So it's kind of thinking about what's going to happen, right? What's going to happen to the forest? What new species are going to be here? What species are not going to be here? What effects is that going to have in the soils? What's that effect going to have on the wetlands, on stormwater, natural stormwater management? I'm thinking about all those kind of things. Heavy rainfall, this is another one. This graph's a little bit confusing when you first look at it, but we're thinking about the red part would be the high number of days. When we're looking at 2 or more inches of precipitation, right? So it's potentially going to be around 2 to 2.5 days as an increase to the current average per year. And when we think about a 2-inch rainfall, you know, that's going to create a lot of localized flooding issues. And if we're going to be dealing with those, say, 2 more times a month, you know, what are the problems that are going to come out of that? How can we resolve those and think through those now? And then this is kind of the opposite of what has been mentioned, and this is thinking about annual days with a temperature below freezing. You know, you can see currently we're right around the 140-ish mark, but by the 2080, you can see there's potential for it to go to 60 days. When thinking about that, that's essentially now December and January, or January and February is the entire winter, right? So we won't have that snowpack, we won't have that gradual melt where everything will be just running off. Now, chances are we'll be having more, I guess, wet precipitation in the form of rain or ice. And what are the problems that are going to come along with that? I guess I can skip through all that. I forgot those were all there. So the way we did this is we broke out when we were in the workshop, after we went through the climate data. During the workshop, that was about 3 times as long. We then broke out into groups. There was 4 tables, roughly 5 to 6 individuals at each table. We kept those, took those 4 focus hazards with us. Those were the extreme temps, flooding, winter storm, high wind events. We thought about those 3 focus sections, which is the infrastructure, environmental, and societal things. Taking a look at those. The tools and resources that we had on that day, we had the matrix, maps, markers, each other. We had a excerpt from the hazard mitigation plan. So people were at the table with the ability to, you know, make notes on maps, draw circles, lines, say this should be moved, or it was things of this is the area where there's a forest fire or potential for. And we still have the hard copies of those maps, and I'll get those back to Kim once we submit that report. So the matrix was mentioned. This is what the matrix looked like. During the day we had of the workshop, we had these printed out like 30 by 40 inches. And it's essentially an organized way to get through the day and to try to sort out as many, I guess, bumps in the road, if you will, for a future project. We were trying to hash all those things out now during the workshop. So the first thing we did was we identified those top priority hazards. Then we went through and identified the features. Right? We can think of infrastructure features as such as culverts, dams, anything kind of hard infrastructure. And like I said before too, even something like communications or thinking of a bylaw as an infrastructure, right? A stormwater management bylaw. Went through all the societal features. Each table did this as individual tables. Went through the environmental features too, thinking like runoff pollutions and those kind of things. How's the forest going to change? As we were going across the matrix, we were thinking about what is the estimated location. Some things are easy, you know, Town Hall, 123 Main Street. But something societal, like a nonprofit or a group of vulnerable people or a non-English speaking neighborhood, we might not be able to just put such an easy address on that. So we were coming up with ways of how to identify those locations. Same with environmental features. And then ownership. This is another one that seems to be a hurdle in almost every town that I've worked with. Is sometimes things come up. It might be, for example, a farm pond dam, right? The vague name for the little dam that holds the water back on one of these farms. And the questions of who owns it now, because at some points it might have been, you know, John Smith's, and then he transferred it to Joe Smith, and now we're not really sure who owns it. So when we're thinking about becoming resiliency, ownership does become important for the town to be able to act upon that and become more resilient. And then we tried to come up with ways of how are each of these lines across, right? As for example, the culverts going across that line. It's a culvert. Where is it? Who owns it, right? Now is it a vulnerability or strength? And this is where those 4 hazards come into play, because a culvert during a drought tends to not be as much of a problem during a period of flooding. So some areas things were one or the other. Sometimes they were both. So we went through and identified all that as well. After lunch, we then came back. As you can see, the left side is pretty much completed, but then we started working on the right side, and now we're thinking, instead of going across the lines, we're thinking about going down in columns, right? So each one of those natural hazards, how was that affecting the feature that was identified in the morning? At the same time, we were prioritizing those high, medium, low, kind of based table by table. What they believed they came up with was a higher, medium, low priority, and along with a timeline of kind of a short of less than 2 years, a long over 2 years, and ongoing, where it's something we're always working to improve. Those are also identified. As you can see, we were in the Great Hall that day. See, there's multiple participants, and these are just a few pictures of the table summaries, or what we would call report outs. You can kind of see in the background there where there's the 4 matrix all filled out in marker. Everything looks good, tons of information, right? So there's a lot of information that came out. So each table had a report out and kind of gave a summary of what they found, what they thought of, what was interesting to them, what was a hurdle, what's a setback, what's a potential future project, with something that we could do at little or no cost. After the report outs, everyone then voted, right? So everyone as a group had a chance to hear and see everyone's projects that they came up with, their thoughts, whatever the case may have been. And then that gave us, and when I say us, I mean the town of Westborough along with CMRPC, a better understanding of where the town kind of as a whole is seeing importance and how they would like to move forward, right? So we're getting that kind of building that foundation of engagement and agreement. So I think what everybody's dying to know is, what did we find? As you can see here, like I was saying before, we had those hard copy maps, and we had some blank papers that everybody took notes to really hash out what it is they wanted to say and put pen to paper before it went on the matrix. So I commend the town of Westborough for doing that, really thinking through everything before they committed it to the final matrix. Oh, one thing I do want to note before we move forward, I just thought about this, is that I just threw a lot of information at you and kind of through that big process. So before I move forward, I wanted to see if anyone had any kind of questions on how that process worked.
Thanks, Peter. This is Shelby. Are there any questions from the board? I see Alan, no.
No, I was there, so I understand it, and I read the very large document they gave us before the meeting tonight.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Syed, any questions on the process?
No, just please go on. This is fascinating.
Okay.
Okay, great. I will keep going. The other thing that I wanted to note too is that I think it may have been the only one in the state or in this program within the state of Massachusetts to have done it. But the DPW, the director and the assistant director got their crew together prior to the workshop. They knew that this was going to be an important date, and they knew that the DPW was going to bring a lot, would have a lot to bring to the table. So they did a very condensed version of this with as many people as they could get in the DPW crew to come out, so that way that the director and assistant director could bring the voice of the entire DPW to this process. So for that, I just want to commend and thank the DPW for thinking outside the box and coming extremely prepared. Okay. All right, so infrastructure concerns. As I'm moving forward, this is what came out of the workshop. These are kind of broad brushstrokes in some ways, and some they're very pinpointed. But I just want to say that we're just highlighting a couple of things that seem to have held some importance to the entire group of the day. There was much more discussion regarding all this stuff, so I'm kind of giving us the short version just moving forward, just as an FYI. So culverts was one of the big infrastructure concerns when we're thinking town-wide. Some culverts are undersized, some culverts are in disrepair. There's also some issues with the MBTA owned and the MassDOT owned culverts, right, where that presents some challenges with the ownership, right? Who maintains it? Who upgrades it? Who repairs it? Who do we communicate with? Right? There's just issues, some not giant issues, but just issues that create challenges moving forward. We're thinking of water systems. There was a lot of discussions regarding groundwater and surface water resources, both vulnerable to commercial, residential, and agricultural and industrial uses, right? So who's using the water? How much of the water? Is there any plans to replace that water? Who's responsible to replace that water? I also talked about the wastewater treatment plant. Discharges into the Assabet River. So essentially, the town is using their water, cleaning the water, and then sending it back into the system, but yet that water is leaving the town, right? So thinking about ways of how can we recharge those water systems too. Another concern was just flooding and stormwater runoff concerns, right? So essentially anything that's on the road when the stormwater comes, washes everything off the road into the soils, then back into the groundwater. So trying to think about how do we improve upon those systems. And then municipal resources. So this was more thinking about upgrades to sheltering systems, backup powers at the senior center, high school, concerns with the primary shelter being at the high school, and if there was ever something that came through that there was a need for long-term sheltering, then what would be the disruption of school? You know, back in February, that was very legitimate. Now in the age of COVID, now we have all kinds of other concerns too, right? Is the school even open? Is that a concern anymore? Now we have to think about social distancing, things like that. So some other things too here is infrastructure strengths. Municipal buildings were discussed at length. Transit systems, utilities, and public safety. These are all identified as strengths. When we're thinking about the municipal building, it's not just like the physical brick and mortar location, but also the services provided. Town hall, the offices, schools, after school programs, senior center and their programs, fully staffed police, fully staffed fire departments, fully staffed DPW departments. When we're thinking about transit, there's a lot of access, right? Accessibility to 495, to Route 9, the Mass Pike, MBTA services. So transit was thought of as a strength. Utilities was a functioning public water system, 6 water supply protection zones throughout the town, a great relationship with National Grid and the cell tower providers, and also that the utilities are proactive with the water conservation. And then when we're thinking about public safety, sometimes we think about police and fire right off the bat, right? Did somebody say something? No, okay. But when we're thinking of public safety, we typically think of fire departments and police right off the bat. They do provide public safety, and we thank them for that. But also in the background is DPW. When the storm does come through, or the flood does occur, or we need after an ice storm debris removals and all those things, the DPW really steps up and is a huge piece of the public safety sector. So when we're going through those features and thinking about what do we have as vulnerabilities, what do we have as strengths, then we came to those hurdles of who owns it, where is it, all those things. We started thinking about what are the actions. And I'm just highlighting a few of the high priority actions, and these were determined through the votes and through how each table categorized. So this was more an exercise of thinking things through and trying to come to terms on some level of agreement. And culverts and catch basin upgrades was one. Stormwater management was another. water provisions, and expanding redundancy. So to elaborate on those a little bit, when we're thinking about the culverts and catch basins, it was thought that there's a drainage study needed to identify, prioritize, and create more green infrastructure throughout the town. Right? When we're thinking about nature-based solutions to those culvert and drainage problems. Also, an assessment, maintenance, or reconstruction plan based on actual culvert conditions through those assessments. So more of a long-term slow process there was thought out that could be very particular in sort of almost at the microscopic level where we can identify each and every problem and a solution to each one of those problems. Stormwater was to conduct drainage and nutrient loading study town-wide. So what do we have? Where do we have it? Where are the problematic areas? And how can we move forward? That was kind of step one. Water provisions was to investigate the recharge options, right? Where can we get this water? Is there a way for us to, after we use the water of the town, clean the water of the town, we give it back to ourselves in the town instead of sending it downstream? A water meter study and upgrades was discussed at length. Education and outreach on water conservation and protections of resources, that was another big one. An increase in the upstream infiltration to protect the security of potable water. So this was members of the workshop thinking about what is affecting us outside of the town and what can we do about it, right? So thinking about how we can create cleaner waters that do enter Westborough. And expanding redundancy, this was thinking about a feasibility study for a substation to house fire, PD, DPW, almost as staging areas, and also as a possibility of a community center that is also, when designed, to think about how can this community center act as a shelter in a time of need, or a staging area for DPW or PD or FD. Is it a one building that can do many, many different things? So those are some of the highlights from the infrastructure actions. As part of the report, the matrix is in there, and you can see the hundreds of ideas or features that were identified and ideas that were brought up too within infrastructure. But these are the ones that the group kind of agreed upon. So move to societal concerns. Communications was one. That was an area of concern. Vulnerable populations was another. Community preparedness was another. In Rogers Field, when we were thinking about communications, we were thinking about the kind of the physical infrastructure when it comes to communications. Those underground copper wires that will need to be upgraded and replaced, and also how the overhead communication systems are vulnerable to tree damages. Same with communication towers, high wind events, and another big piece was that was discussed at length by pretty much every table was the lack of non-English communications. Right? And I believe in the age of COVID, I think some of these things have been brought to the forefront, and actions have already been taken on some of these language barriers and communicating to languages outside of our own. Vulnerable populations is another one. We're thinking about Hayward Landing, river flooding over there, the cottage colony. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to say. Sorry, disregard. But when we're thinking about vulnerable populations is who are the people that we need to communicate more? Who are the people that will need more services in a time of disaster? Or even thinking climate resiliency, who are the people that are going to need the most attention if we do have 3 straight months of over 90 degrees, right? Thinking about those senior populations or aging populations. And then Rogers Field. Rogers Field was a concern because it's an active field. It's an active recreation facility, baseball, soccer, all kinds of things happen there. Also, the Westborough Council on Aging is down that way, but the concern was that regarding flooding concerns. Some of the strengths that were identified were the senior population, and we actually just kind of touched on that as a vulnerability, as that will potentially be the population that's going to need the most attention. Right? When we're thinking about the senior population as a strength, the Council on Aging is extremely active. They're also extremely engaged and provide services, social services to the seniors. Thinking about it in another way too, it's a great place where education, engagement, information, on both ways can be gathered, right? What are the seniors' actual needs? What are the services provided to the town that the seniors can use, right? And so on and so forth. Outreach groups. We're talking about Westborough Connects, came up a lot. Farmers markets, another place where it's a great starting point. It's already an organized thing. Now we can go there, begin to develop broader means of communication within the public through the farmers market. Part of that outreach group too, I think, would be Sustainable Westborough, groups of that nature. In the bylaws too, right? Thinking about keeping those non-zoning wetland protection bylaws and amending that later on to have stricter wetland bylaws than the state's minimum, right? So Westborough's already begun to be proactive in these areas, right? So those are some of the strengths that we brought up. When we're thinking about societal actions, again, this is the quick summary, the short version. We're thinking about expanded communications, improving access, and community outreach. So when we're thinking about communications, it's those infrastructures, right? Assess them. Is there backup plans? What are those backup plans? What is an alternate hard infrastructure that can be implemented? Same with expanding communications was the non-English communications. How do we distribute that information through the emergency alert systems? And I believe that has already been incorporated into the town of Westborough. So I commend you for that. Improving access. Thinking about, again, the language access plans, right? Equitable knowledge and access to services, emergency plans, general town information. How do we get that out to everyone? How does everyone know where to go, where they can get services, where they can cool down from the heat, where they can heat up during the winter? Also, a resiliency plan to increase access to housing and transportation egresses. So what are alternate ways to get in and out of some place when we're thinking, are these roads going to become regularly flooded? Is there a way around them? Is there a way to raise the road? Think of all kinds of different ideas in that respect. And then community aspect, we touched on it a little bit in the strengths, but to build upon what's already there, right? To build upon Westborough Connects, to promote them, to help them get information, to possibly also connect other groups such as the farmers market or interfaith association, housing associations, farmers markets, the senior center, trying to get all of those smaller networks who may be doing overlapping work or who may have overlapping needs populations, and how to connect them better. Get all that information to who actually needs it, and in the reverse, get the information of what the actual needs are to the town of Westborough. All right. So the environmental, this should be concerns. I skipped one. Okay, environmental concerns. We're thinking about insect-borne diseases and thinking about Tripoli, Lyme disease, gypsy moths, invasive species like beavers, right? What are the impacts now, and what are the potential impacts if the climate does change as projected? What if we have longer periods of drought? Are those smaller pools of water then become, I don't want to say superheated, but heated to have a thriving mosquito population, right? And then is Tripoli going to become something similar to what was last year or last summer, where a lot of things were getting canceled, right? Will that become the new norm? thinking about forest maintenance, thinking about the street trees, right? There are strengths to them, but there's also problems created with the street trees if not maintained, right? And also the forested areas may have a potential for more wildfire, more invasive species like we just touched on, and changes in the ecosystem that we touched on in the beginning. So thinking about all these multitudes of problems that are concerning, something to be aware of. Cedar Swamp, there's another big topic of discussion for the day. Has poorly draining soils, accompanied by improperly maintained culverts along 495, 90, and the commuter rail. All of those things have contributed to Greece flooding issues. Example given at the Rogers Field, everything's kind of connected there. And the wetlands is not functioning properly, right? Limited relief through culverts, and soils not draining as they once may have in the past, right? And thinking about all these concerns. Water resources. One of the concerns was the algae blooms are becoming more frequent in the warmer waters, right? And during a drought or a heavy rain, they're going to produce more runoff. So if we have longer periods of drought, soil becomes then hard. Then we have an intense storm of, say, 2 inches all at once, and that's all we get. It's not going to have, the soil is not going to have time to absorb that. Where's all that runoff going to go back, runoff to? So thinking a lot of runoff pollution. And the pond off of Fox Lane was brought up a lot too. A lot of uprooted trees, increased risk of flooding. That's becoming a mosquito habitat. Water quality issues were discussed too, along with the Park Davies Brook, the watershed. Same kind of situation there. Poor water resource management and stormwater management were of concern. All right, so some of the strengths. We just mentioned Cedar Swamp as a concern or vulnerability, but now here we have it as a strength too. So as I mentioned earlier, some things can be both. It's completely acceptable. So Cedar Swamp, even though it may not be functioning properly, is still a critical environmental concern. It's on the state registry of historic places. It's a unique natural resource. It has vernal pools, habitats for spotted turtles, host plants for the hair-streaked butterfly, and Atlantic white cedar trees, right? So there's all kinds of habitat strengths there. Where are we? Okay, recreation. So when we're thinking about the Westborough Community Land Trust, open spaces, town beaches, plenty of recreation opportunities, and open space throughout the town. The list kind of goes on and on when we're thinking of both passive and active recreation. Walk Up Robinson, the Bowman Conservation Area, Assabet Conservation, Lake Chauncey, Haskell Recreation, Greg's Field. The list goes on and on, right? And when we're thinking about those strengths, it was also thinking about how do we keep these as strengths? How do we preserve these areas? When it comes to the environmental actions, invasive and nuisance species was brought up a lot. Acquire and protect land was brought up quite a bit, and improve open space and recreation. So when we're thinking about those invasive species, this is when public health kind of had a different life to it, right? We were thinking about the public health aspects of it, right? The triple E's and the Lyme disease. What's going to change with that, right? Thinking about resource protection, trying to reduce and educate people on stagnant water town-wide, right? Through culvert upgrades, dredging. A way to reduce some of the invasive species was thinking about bat boxes or even chicken flocks, and public awareness regarding all of that stuff, right? Natural animals to eat those natural insects, thinking of nature-based solutions there. Improving on the open spaces to make sure that we update those OSRPs to fund them, to implement what does come out of them, and to try to cross as many other plans throughout the town into those open space plans, and for the open space to also influence some of those other plans. And from my understanding, this acquire and protect lands is already in process, right? Purchasing conservation land, right? To use those lands as active recreations or places of passive recreation too as well. Excuse me, active recreation. And keeping those lands in their natural habitat in the state to function naturally versus sell the land off to private investors. And now we have a neighborhood and suddenly we have more flooding problems, right? So those are some of the highlights of the actions that we came up with. So I'll take a second there to pause, just if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts before we kind of wrap this up.
Peter, you've been extremely thorough. I'm not seeing any questions from the board at this time. Why don't you continue, and then we'll make sure we leave time for questions at the end.
Okay, great.
Oh, actually, Shelby.
Okay, yes, please. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. You can't see me, so you don't know. I've just two things. I was wondering why we only mentioned Rogers Field. And even in reading the longer report, I don't remember any other athletic fields being pointed out as vulnerable to flooding, but the one that used to be Hennessy's property on the way to out Hopkinton Road is one. And then I also don't remember seeing Youth and Family Services highlighted in the full report as part of our outreach and communication resource, because it's obviously a very large and important resource. So I don't want to leave that out. And I know Kara was one of our participants, so she must have mentioned that, but we've got to make sure that gets included.
Yeah, and Lee, I would add to this, as Shelby, I would add to that we've obviously seen the Youth and Family Services doing a tremendous amount of communication through producing the community resource guide through the pandemic. So it's actually something that's in practice, to your point, already.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And to add on that, Youth and Family Services has brought translation services as much more accessible to the town. And so there's the potential for those services to integrate with some of the emergency communications.
Yep. All right, Peter, I'm sure you've made note of that. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. I did make notes of that, and I'll go back through and add as appropriate. And I do recall a lot of those things being discussed. I guess I'll do a better job of highlighting those in the report. But kind of the next steps for the town is to finalize the draft report. So we'll incorporate some of these comments that do come out of today. We'll get those into the draft report that's been sent around the town. And I welcome all feedback from anyone about that. Kim kind of touched on this earlier. Due to COVID, we were awarded an extension through June 2021. So those reports are due then. We are projected to submit that in September, probably mid to late September, in advance of the spring round of action grants. So once those reports get submitted, you'll receive that MVP community certification from the state. There'll be annual reporting done by the core team. In this case, it's the submission of the report is the annual report as an FYI. And then we'll have time to develop and apply for an action grant. Right, so thinking about some of the things that were discussed today, some things that maybe weren't spelled out in writing in the report, but fit the narrative, are eligible. So to talk about the action grants a little bit, the next round expected in the spring of 2021. So the nice thing about getting the extension is that we wouldn't have had this completed in time to apply for an action grant. It would have been a big undertaking to try to push that in before that, or to finish this planning aspect first. So the nice thing is we have time essentially from October through, let's say, April to start thinking about this next round. So projects for an individual community could be up to $2 million. The largest one that I've seen was in nearby Millbury. They were awarded $1 million through an action grant, and they combined that with many other grants and donations to do a rather large project, which I think COVID made extremely difficult for them. But as a region too, you can apply for up to $5 million. In the state doesn't, I don't want to speak for the state, but there's not really a clear-cut definition. A region doesn't have to be two towns who border each other. It could be two towns within a watershed. It could be two towns within the state of Massachusetts. As long as you both have the certification, you can apply for up to $5 million. They are on one-year grant cycles. This past action grant RFR, there were ways to have a 2-year grant cycle, but those would have to be explained and shown in the application of, what work you plan on completing in year 1 and how much you need for that, and then how much you would need and what will be completed in year 2. So there is potential ways to work around that 1-year grant cycle. That's typically June 1 through June 30. July 1 through June 30. There also is a 25% match. It could be cash, in-kind, donations, private money. The only thing it cannot be is state funds. Cannot use state funds. I know that says non-state funds. It should say not state funds. I apologize for that typo. So that's another thing in the workshop was, who do we want in the room and who's potential partners? That was also discussed, right? Kind of the who else is in town that could provide, say, an in-kind match? For example, Sustainable Westborough, right? There's in-kind match hours that could be used through that committee. And if anybody wants, I can send these links out too, so you can learn more, see more. I guess with that, I'll open it up to questions and comments. I'm sure everyone has probably heard enough of my voice for one day. So I'd like to hear everyone else's thoughts or comments, questions, concerns.
I have a question, Peter.
Yeah.
You mentioned maybe in-kind grants or matching grants through Sustainable Westborough, but if Sustainable Westborough got grants, it would probably be state money grants. So can that be, are you saying that could be parlayed with this? Or were you thinking if Sustainable Westborough got a grant from a non-governmental source that it could be parlayed? I wasn't quite sure what you meant.
So that was thinking more of the match. So if Sustainable Westborough was to get a state grant, the funding from that state grant couldn't go towards the match. But what could happen is that the funding through the MVP action grant and, say, a potential funding source that Sustainable Westborough obtained, those grant monies could be combined, for a larger project. Or when thinking in the future, are there multiple grant sources that could assist with the larger project where, say, the average grant that MVP gives out is around $350,000, but that's not going to cover it, right? So the state funding couldn't be used for the cash match, but
Right.
potentially Sustainable Westborough's person hours into the project could be used as in-kind match.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so just to clarify, so the match, 25% match, isn't necessarily cash, it can be services in kind.
Correct.
So, volunteer hours from Sustainable Westborough or other organizations. If an organization, if an engineering firm were going to donate through the town or through Sustainable Westborough to do survey work for a project, things of that nature can count.
Correct. Even you can think of the youth population as well, right?
Yep.
Having the youth assist in some way, shape, or form, those hours volunteered would count as in kind.
Great. Alan, did you have any other comments or questions for Peter?
Well, I guess my comments or questions were more in line with some of the things Lee had mentioned earlier as far as other locations, recreation otherwise, that might be susceptible to flooding other than Rogers Road. She mentioned Hennessy, even the soccer fields at the state hospital have runoff issues and heavy rains, if those were ever needed. more inclusion of youth and family services, and I guess some of the other resources, even the food pantry that we have, that are able to help us outreach to various populations within town. I would like to see added or mentioned a little bit more prominently in the document as resources and as part of our strengths.
Okay, thank you.
Good point.
Selectman Hoff, please.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead, we can hear you.
Hey, Shelby? Hello?
Yep, go ahead, sorry, we can hear you.
So I was just, so first I want to thank you for CMRPC for this great presentation. And I was remembering I brought this up to our board in 2018 in August, and so now it's glad that it's come to fruition. And one of the things I just want to make sure that we do as a town, I know a lot of time has been spent by the town departments, but is there going to be involvement of the town citizens? Where can they fit into this conversation? Or is it going to be, because I'm worried about a top-down approach, so where can town residents contribute to this?
Kim, do you want to take a shot at that in terms
Sure.
of?
I've had a lot of conversations with Pete to understand the process. So this is, I just want to step back. And I think one of the ways that Pete framed this that really helped me think about what it is, it's a thought process. It captures thinking at a point in time. And, it's not intended to be a master plan type of document. I also clarified that if there are things that are not included in the report, anything that's excluded, not in there, it doesn't mean we're unable to get funding to address an issue. So if we've missed a particular location where there's flooding, if we've missed a certain vulnerability or an issue, that doesn't tie our hands down the road when we're looking for grant funding. So I wanted to make sure, how comprehensive and how inclusive did this have to be? So that's one piece of it. The other piece, the process is really very scripted and laid out by the state. So at this point, our intention was after the presentation tonight, we can put the document summarizing the workshop. The document is a summary of the workshop primarily. Yep.
Excuse me, Kim. Peter, could you please mute your phone line? I think we're getting some feedback. Peter, if you can hear me, if you wouldn't mind muting your phone, that would be great. Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how to mute it here.
Okay, no worries. Thanks.
That's okay. So the document summarizes the discussion that happened during the workshop. And our intention was after the presentation tonight, we will put the report up on the website. As far as community involvement, they can certainly, if anybody has questions or comments after reading the report, I think we have on one of the slides, we have my contact information up, and we'd welcome folks, comments that way. But as far as, I guess we're, when talking to Peter, because this is a summary of a one-day workshop, the extent to which comments may or may not be incorporated, I'm really going to leave that to Peter, to his judgment.
Kim, do you want to, so I know that it was said, but I just want to clarify that, so there was the core team, which was town staff, but then that one-day workshop was much larger than that. And so even though it was only invitation only, there were, and Kim knows this better than I do, but we had our National Grid liaison there. We had members of Westborough Connects there. We had members of multiple boards and committees that are all town residents. So it certainly was not just a town staff-led workshop.
Right.
Well, the other piece I'd like to add to Selectman Hashmi's concerns is that if we think about the groups that were invited to that one-day workshop, because there are committees there is feedback coming from, for example, Sustainable Westborough. right? When we think about the master plan, that many folks are participating in that. I mean, I saw a lot of things coming out of this report that I've seen on the master plan board for consideration and concern. The Complete Streets Initiative we've heard about. Again, I know these are different projects and have different intentions, but we're starting to see thematic consistency across these projects. So I feel very comfortable that we're getting that input and feedback, and that it's not just kind of being done in a silo.
And so the other thing that I just wanted to bring up for the residents is that, these droughts are of great, I grew up in a area of drought, and I know what it's like not to have water. So I think as a town, as residents, while it's easy to discuss, how to recycle, reuse, and recompose, we are going to have to, as a town, decide, are we willing to make sacrifices that fundamentally alter how we look at things? For instance, how much water are we using in a drought to water the golf course or our various fields? I mean, how much a day? I mean, I know the town uses 2 million gallons of water a day across the board, but how much water is being used to keep the golf course green a day, a month, a year? How much is it to water the fields? I think these are the conversations that we have. And one of the other concerns, and I want to thank the staff for this, is the Interstate 495 and the quality and the fact that Sandra Pond is right there. And it's always been a source of great concern to me that if there's ever a spill there, it will take like minutes for that, or if there's a fuel for that contaminant to reach Sandra Pond. And last but not least, I just wanted to, since this had been discussed before, with regards to Lake Chauncey, there had been a discussion of equity, but if we are serious about the equity of water in our town, we need to take care of this lake. As it stands, we are letting residents use a lake where we honestly do not know what is going on, and we check for only one bacteria as a surrogate for all the other bacteria or other markers of the lake. And our sanitarian for the past 5 years has done a great job of documenting beach results. And there are multiple factors that contribute to these beach results that I don't want to spend time getting into. But if you look at his data, you will see that over the years, the maximum contaminant level has gradually increased. And while it's below the safe, quote unquote, safe threshold, it is kind of highlighting the fact that the lake is under stress. And I think it behooves us as a town to focus on, this is the one large water resource in the area. We need to make sure that it stays that way for generations to come.
Thank you, Syed. I think everything everyone has already said, added comments, so I won't repeat them. I want to thank you, Peter, for your time tonight and for the really thorough report. I know we're just getting the highlights and bullet points on slides, but I think it would be important to have those, Kim, on our website. Yep, I thank you, and for the community to see as at their leisure. Is there anyone else? I know there are other representatives here, Jim, Pete, Chris, who wanted to add. Ian, I see you've joined us. I'll give you a second. Any others who participated? No, Pete?
Comment?
Yes, please, Jim.
Jim Robbins here, town planner. This report, the MVP report, will become input to the master plan, particularly the sustainability and climate change section. You have two members of that committee here this evening, Peter Dunbeck and myself. As such, it will be vetted through the public hearing process. So that's a good comment and point made by Selectman Hotchme. So there'll be another chance for people to think about these issues in regard to our vulnerable water supplies and natural resources. So I encourage anyone that's interested beyond those on the master plan to continue to follow up with this through the master plan.
WestboroughMasterPlan.org, right?
Yes, thank you. You're my advertisement. Thank you.
There you go. Chris, anything you'd like to add?
I'll just echo or maybe add on to what Jim said, which is, I think sometimes we get focused on, like, this is a grant program, essentially. It's an opportunity for us to get funding to do something, which is great, but the process itself is continuous. So, we went through this process that Peter just explained, but essentially it needs to happen again over time, in the future. And as with every other program that we've mentioned, Complete Streets, whatever it is, it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process where that feedback from residents or, businesses or whoever, it's continuous. And so I think that's important to highlight. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Derek, I see you're on as well. Anything to add? Nope, we can't hear you, Derek. Okay. All right. Ian, thanks for joining us. Welcome. Anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think it was covered. I came in about 45 minutes ago, so I missed the first 25 minutes, but I think between Lee, Allen, and others, I have nothing additional. But just thanking Peter for the presentation.
Great. And I do want to again thank Chris for his leadership to sort of work with the DPW department to survey or engage them so that feedback came through. So great job. Okay, great. With that, Peter, I want to thank you again and give you the rest of your evening back. Kim, thank you for your leadership on this. And I don't think we have to formally close the listening session. Is that correct? We didn't formally open it. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kim. Okay. Super. So being that it's 6:16, we'll move to our next agenda item, which is the approval of meeting minutes. First item is the meeting minutes of June 30. Do I have a motion?
I move to accept the meeting minutes for June 30, 2020 as presented.
Second, Selectman Johnson.
Thank you. Any comments or discussion? Okay, with that, I'll have a roll call vote. Selectman Emery?
Yes.
Selectman Hashmi?
Yes.
Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Edberg?
Edinburgh, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes. 5-0, 5 being present. We'll move to the minutes of July 7th. Do I have a motion?
I move we accept the meeting minutes for the Board of Selectmen meeting on July 7, 2020.
I'll
Okay,
second that, Selectman Johnson.
thank you. And note for the board that Sela did send a message out that some adjustments had been made prior to the meeting. And that was sent in an email, some minor edits to the July 7th and July 14th. So presuming your motion, Alan, includes those. Thank you. And second, great. Okay, any discussion, changes, comments? Okay, with that, we'll have roll call vote. Selectman Emery?
Yes.
Thank you. Selectman Hashmi?
Yes.
Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Edinburgh?
Edinburgh, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes. 5-0, 5 being present. And July 14 minutes. Do I have a motion? Alan, you're on a roll.
I move we accept the Board of Selectmen meeting minutes for July 14th, 2020, with inclusive of the minor changes presented by Sela this afternoon.
Great.
And I'll second that, Selectman Johnson.
Thank you. Any comments, questions, changes?
No, I just wanted to thank Sela for her hard work. Thank you.
Yeah, hard work overall to keep this up to date. The public appreciates it because they do read them, so that's great. Okay, we'll have a vote. Selectman Emery?
Emery, yes.
Selectman Hashmi?
Yes.
Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Edinburgh?
Edinburgh, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes. 5-0, 5 being present. Great. Okay. We'll move to agenda item number 3, which is discussion vote for applications for alteration of premises for outdoor dining. And we have our building commissioner for Leonardo one. Fred, good evening.
Hello tonight. Good evening.
Hello. Do we want to take it away? I know we have some information that was emailed in our email to us. Do you want to take, what one do you want to do first? Or Christy, I'm sorry.
I don't know if Christy can post that little drawing. The drawing is very confusing, so I'll try to go through it.
I'm sorry. If Alan can do it, my Adobe's not working, so I can't pull it up.
Okay, let's give Alan a second for that, please.
Okay, so I'll have to kind of verbally walk you through this one. All right, that's the drawing. If you know where Sapporo's is, it's next to CrossFit's in the Arturo's Plaza, if you will. So it's a separate building. Yummy Mummies is on the corner. So basically what they're proposing to do is come out straight from their door. They wouldn't inhibit CrossFits, so they're proposing an 18-foot wide section by a 40-foot long section. You'll notice the fire lane. So Chief Purcell and myself visited the site today to verify that the chief is okay with this. Based on what's going on in the duration, he did okay it. So he did do a site visit with me. They are proposing to put up fencing there. A total of 7 tables. 4 of them would be 6 seats, and 3 of them would be at 4 seats. Whatever that total is. I didn't do the math off the top of my head, but that's what they're proposing, and it would stretch out to about the beginning of their parking area. So that's the generic rundown of what they're proposing.
Okay, I'll open it up to questions first from the board.
No questions from Emery.
No questions from Johnson, Selectman Johnson.
No questions for me.
Okay, so I just went on mute. So I do have a question, Fred, just from the drawing. It's hard to see. Ellen, I don't know if you can make that any bigger, but I just want to understand, will it be all the way over to the parking spaces, or there is still room for passage of vehicles between the fire lane and parking spaces that are lined there?
No, there wouldn't be passage. You'd have to go around them. You have to go basically into the parking lot to get around what they're proposing.
Right, and most of the parking spaces in front of CrossFit's currently using for their outdoor exercise workouts.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're running workouts, they're putting up temporary fencing and blocking it off anyways.
Yes, so it's a joint. It does kind of adjoin their area where they have their temporary outdoor workout area. You're correct.
And we're not seeing an issue with parking. I mean, I haven't seen as sort of during the day or even in the evening that's causing a parking problem elsewhere in the area. Is that fair to say? We haven't heard any complaints?
No, it shouldn't. It's not going to cut off any of their parking. They'd have to go around it, I guess, is the best way of saying it. But as pointed out, CrossFit has their temporary workout area in the parking area anyway.
Right, and they take the fencing up and down during the day in the various workouts. Okay, I just wanted to understand the visual first and understand if the parking and the traffic flow changes were anticipated. It sounds like they have been, and it's not a problem. Okay.
Yeah, and just both the chief and myself insisted that CrossFit was okay with this, as well as the nail salon, which is an immediate neighbor.
Yep.
So we actually have it in writing. We've been assured that both the owners of those operations are okay with this.
Okay, great. That was another question I was going to ask. Thanks, Fred.
We try to cut them off.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Syed, I just want to make sure you didn't have any questions.
Nope, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, great. Do I have a motion?
I can make the motion.
Okay.
I went and got the language. I move pursuant to the governor's order, COVID-19, order number 35, dated June 2nd, 2020, to approve the change in description of the licensed premises at 50 East Main Street as presented for the purpose of permitting outdoor alcohol services.
Second that, Emery.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll take a roll call vote. Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Emery?
Emery, yes.
Selectman Hashmi?
Yes.
Selectman Edinburgh?
Edinburgh, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes, 5-0. Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Did we have one more? I thought we had Bertucci's.
No, you did Bertucci's. You did them last
We
week.
get pictures of the last meeting.
Okay, all right, my bad, sorry. Alan, you were right when we were preparing the seals. I think we've already done it, and okay, I apologize. All right, good, moving on. Fred, have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, next agenda item is a request to appoint Julie Squires to the Public Safety Committee. Christy, do you want to speak to this?
Yep, so the Public Safety Committee is made up of both the chiefs and their deputies, also DPW and myself as superintendent, and the chair of the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, and Julie Squires is now the chair of the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Thank you.
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
I move that we appoint Julie Squires to the Public Safety Committee.
For an indefinite term?
for
Yeah,
indefinite.
for indefinite term. For
Thank you.
indefinite term.
I
Sorry,
second.
thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alan and Syed. Okay, great. Any comments or questions? Okay, as always, I want to thank her for her participation now in 2 committees. See, it's like a 2-for-1. You participate in one, you get another.
Right.
Okay, Selectman Hashmi,
Yes.
Selectman Edinburgh,
Edinburgh, yes.
Selectman Johnson,
Johnson, yes.
and Selectman Emery,
Yes.
and Selectman Marshall, yes, 505 being present. Congratulations and thank you. Okay. Next agenda item, we have a presentation by our town clerk. Before we have, I do see Wendy is on. Selectman Hashmi did want to provide a disclaimer, so I'll give him a moment to do that before this item.
Thank you. So thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be clear to the residents of the town, I had reached out to the State Ethics Commission because of my concern that there may be a possible conflict of interest were I to discuss election-related items in the meetings of the Board of Health or the Board of Selectmen, as I'm a candidate in the November election. So based on the advice from the State Ethics Commission, and because I want to avoid the appearance of any impact on the election and to ensure a free, transparent, and impartial process, I will abstain from any discussion related to matters, election-related matters in any of the boards I serve. I will stay on mute during these discussions, and I will abstain from the vote. And so that's, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for looking into that. Appreciate it. And with that, we have our town clerk, Wendy Mickle. Hi, Wendy. You're on mute. Yep. It's okay. Take a moment. And there you are. Not yet. Oh,
Okay.
There we
There we
go. Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Wendy Mickle, your town clerk. And by virtue of that, I get to be the chief election official too. I wanted to give you and those watching an overview of what's happening with the state primary election and the presidential election. The Secretary of State Elections Division sent out early absentee ballot applications in mid-July in a postcard format to all voters in Massachusetts. I'm sure everybody got the postcard. If you want to vote early by mail, you should return that postcard to the town clerk in order to do that. The postcard also has options for voting. You can vote in the state primary, or you can vote in just the presidential election, or you can vote in both. But you need to decide when you send the postcard back how you want to do that. If you don't send the postcard back, we won't know. If you're voting in a primary and you're unenrolled, you want to select a party in order to vote. I know some people consider themselves independent, but if you want to vote in the party, you have to pick a party in order to get that ballot. The town clerk's office, we received over 3,000 postcard applications from voters that had to be processed. And then we had to stuff and mail over 3,000 packets to each voter requesting a ballot for the September 1st primary. Since Westborough has 3 legislative districts and there are 4 party ballots that we needed to place individually into the correct package to be sure that the voter was receiving the correct party as well as the correct precinct ballot. We did have assistance from 5 Westborough residents, so that was helpful to get that done. Many of those ballots have already started to come back, and we keep them locked up every night. They won't be opened, but they are entered as having been returned, and then they will be cast on Tuesday, September 1st, by a team of poll workers at Westborough High School. If you want to check to see if we received your ballot back, you can go to the town website, and under elections, under ballot returns for elections, there's a link to track your ballot. So you just click on that and you can see whether or not your ballots come back. We're getting a lot every day, so if you don't see it one day, it might be there the next. What we're finding is everyone's calling the office to ask that question. So that's really challenging for us right now. The enormity of ballot requests and processing applications and mailing them out and the returning of and just along with all the preparations for early voting in person and election day voting, it's overwhelming. Then the COVID restrictions need to be adequately met along with new procedures at the polls to keep all voters safe. So I would ask if you can do that link, do it. If not, you can give us a call. Early voting in person begins this Saturday, and it's also on Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in Memorial Hall at Town Hall. It continues through the week during general town hall hours, ending Friday at noon. The early vote in person is for voters who would prefer to vote early and not through the mail and not at the polls on election day. Early vote in person voters will come to Town Hall to vote. Those voters will check in, mark their ballots, and seal it in an envelope. At the end of each day, those sealed ballots will be locked in the ballot case until election day, when they will be cast at the appropriate precinct. The early voting will end on Friday at noon. All of the returned by mail or early voted in-person ballots will be locked up each night until election day. And all those ballots voted early will be cast on election day, September 1st at Westborough High School. And those ballots would include the early vote by mail ballots, the early vote in-person ballots, and the absentee ballots. All the ballots received by mail for the primary election must be received no later than 8 p.m. on September 1st in order to be counted. It's a little different for the presidential election. They have to be postmarked by November 3rd, election day, and then they can be received no later than 5 p.m. on November 6th in order to be counted. The Secretary of Commonwealth's Election Division has given specific procedures for the processing of early voted ballots to all town clerks and election in the state. These procedures were voted by our legislators in July. On election day, September 1st, the polls will open at 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. at Westborough High School for those who plan to cast their ballots in person. The deadline to submit a vote by mail application or absentee ballot application for the primary will be 5 p.m. on Wednesday, August 26th. And the last day to register to vote for the primary or the presidential election is 10 days prior to the primary elections. So that's unusual. It's usually 20 days, but because of all of the COVID changes. They've given everybody up to 10 days before the election. All of this is on the website too. So if you can't remember it all, it's there. The presidential election will be similar to the primary in that we will offer the same options for voting as in the primary. There'll be early and absentee, vote by mail, early vote in person, and voting on election day. For the presidential election in November, on November 3rd, there will be 2 weeks of early voting in person rather than 1 week like the primary. There won't be another postcard mailing for early vote by mail. If you disposed of the card, you'll need to request an application be mailed to you through the town clerk's office. And that's about that on that. I would like to make a few comments about voting is by mail. There is a black drop box outside of Town Hall, which can be used for return of vote by mail ballots. The voter must deposit their own early vote by mail ballot in that box for the primary election. Don't give your ballot to anyone to return for you. You really need to take responsibility for your own ballot being brought and deposited. Once the building reopens, you can bring it into the town clerk's office directly if you want to do that. Absentee ballots are a little different. They may be returned by the voter or a family member. Any person taking precautions relating to COVID-19 shall be deemed to qualify for an absentee ballot, as well as any disabled voter or any voter who will be out of town on election day. So you can designate somebody with an absentee ballot to return your ballot, but you can't do that for early vote ballots. Once the town hall is open for business, then everybody can return their ballots if they choose into the office, or they can still drop them in the drop box outside. Once you've returned your early vote ballot by mail or have voted early in person or submitted an absentee ballot, you cannot change your mind and ask to be allowed to vote on election day. Once you've done it, you've done it. And once we have the ballot back. Both election days, September 1st and November 3rd, will take place at Westborough High School. The polls will open at 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. We'll be using 2 gyms. The Leduc gym will house precincts 1, 2, and 3, and the Fisher gym will house precincts 4 and 5. Entry to Westborough High School will be from the back parking lot, as always. There will be signage to indicate the 2 entrances, one's for precincts 1, 2, and 3, and another for 4 and 5. There'll be markings for social distancing throughout the voting area and sanitizing for voters after the ballot has been cast. Pens will be given with your ballot and should be left in the container on the way out at the warden and clerk tables to be sanitized. If you want to bring your own black pen, that's fine. All voters, as well as election workers, must wear a mask. The primary is September 1st, and it's the first time we've had an election in the gym during COVID. Please bear with us as we maneuver our way through the COVID-19 restrictions and maintaining order at the polls. Please use common sense when voting and adhere to all social distancing requirements. Even if an area appears to may not have been marked properly, signs fall down, things get moved inadvertently. So do your best to try to follow the restrictions as you've been doing it everywhere you go. Also, I'd ask that voters don't socialize or remain in the building once the voting or casting of your ballot is complete, and to please follow the signs to exit the building as well as enter the building. Election information has been posted on the town website. The town website has the voting times, place, sample ballots, along with other election materials and voting information. So I think I've covered everything about elections. The only other thing that I would ask is that if voters and residents be respectful of the employees in the town clerk's office. Whether you're calling on the phone with an issue or a question or chatting through social media, please know I've made every effort possible to meet Westborough's voters' needs during this election period. My staff have been working tirelessly to provide the best possible service we can during these times. The enormity of changes in Mass General laws and the procedures for the upcoming fall elections are substantial and require much thought and consideration as to how we will adhere to these changes. Debbie and Sue and I have been working daily in the office as well as at home through this COVID pandemic. I have reduced or suspended some services due to the length of time or closeness in proximity we need to be to another person. Some of that's for our own health reasons and others because of the challenges we are facing to complete the election changes. We answer an overwhelming number of emails and phone calls from residents and voters. Please have patience while we work through all the new changes and the challenges they bring. Your consideration would be much appreciated. If you have any questions, always feel free to call our office or email us, and go to the town website under the elections section, and you should be able to find everything. And do you have any other questions? Anybody?
Thank you very much, Wendy. Yes, Ian, please.
Wendy, just the one question. I mean, first comment is thank you to you and your staff. I mean, tremendous amount of work and, you know, figuring out the changes and doing all that stuff. So thank you for doing that. The question I have is for the early voting, especially for the one coming up now, next week through September 1st. How are you doing with poll workers? Are there any concerns on your part about having appropriate staffing?
Nope, I seem to have filled most of the spots with poll workers that I had. A lot couldn't, but I still had a lot on call. And I know the Rotary Club is offered to help with anything, and then I've had quite a few people offer if something comes up last minute too. So I think I'm all set.
Great, thanks.
Okay. There was one other issue, just relating to elections, but about our town meeting. I know our bylaws would require our fall town meeting to be on Monday, October 19th. Voting in person for the presidential election begins Saturday, October 17th. And we'll be having it Sunday, the 18th, and then on Monday, the 19th, that whole week and the next 2 following weeks will be at the town hall from 8 to 5. At 5 o'clock, when the polls close, the ballots need to be locked and sealed each night. Check-in reports need to be downloaded each day and recorded to know who has marked their ballot. And so this process assures that a voter will not have an opportunity to vote twice. This process will take at least an hour or 2 a day, and it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the town clerk's office to be able to then go to Westborough High School, check in voters at 6 p.m. until town meeting adjourns. And then we need to be ready early before town hall opens, just to get set up each day for early voting for those next 2 weeks. So I would just ask your consideration of moving the town meeting to a date after September 5th and before the start of early voting for the presidential election, which begins October 17th. So if you take that into consideration, that would be appreciated.
Wendy,
That's it.
could you just repeat the time frame again? Just
September 5th. So anytime between September 5th and October 17th.
So Wendy, we talked about after November 3rd.
Yep, that's even better.
okay. Thank you, Christy.
Yeah. So just for the board, this is in my town manager report, so it'll come up at the end, but Wendy and I talked about her mentioning it in relation to the changes in the election, because certainly, as she described, the changes in the election put a heavy burden on her office and would make it difficult for us to hold October town meeting. In addition, you know, as we've talked about many times, the state budget has not been put in place yet. The town has not obviously gotten through our first quarter of FY21, and so we don't know what those local receipts look like. And so it could benefit us to move the town meeting to November 9th, which is a date that, in talking with the finance department, the finance director and the town assessor are comfortable with in terms of setting the tax rate. And I've also reached out to town council about your ability as a board to move that meeting. So it should be a future agenda item, but I just wanted to give you that information related to Wendy's situation and then also overall town finances.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Any questions for Wendy regarding elections? Okay.
I just appreciate all the hard work. I appreciate all the hard work they're doing. I don't think we can quite comprehend it, but thanks a lot, Wendy, and your staff.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I would ask that, I think the information that was provided in our packet by Wendy is particularly helpful. So if that could be added as part of our minutes, that would be appreciated. I just think there's a lot of detail. There are a lot of questions people have around voting. I mean, we've got the website, but I just think it's a helpful addition just for the public to see what we received.
Yeah, and that's also part of, Wendy had submitted that as part of her the town manager department update a couple weeks ago, so it's also there. So it's
Oh, okay.
Or we'll add it, but we can add it, keep adding it, so.
Okay, great. Yes, Wendy, thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for communicating changes that you've made to other services. I know you don't take those lightly, and you do that in a thoughtful way to continue to provide the highest level of service. So thank you. So,
Thank you.
okay. So we'll move to our next item, which is discussion vote for signing the warrant for the state primary.
Wendy.
Wendy, come back.
I'm back, sorry.
You're not done yet?
I thought I was all done.
I know. Just one more, just a moment more of your time.
Yep. So I need the Board of Selectmen to sign the warrant for the 2020 state primary election. So I can just have it in the office if you want to. I have 3 copies. And it's something that has to be done before August 25th. So if you guys could do it this week, stop by. Just
be
I only need, I just need 3 signatures. So
Okay.
I believe we need a motion. So I would move to execute the warrant for the 2020 state primary as presented.
And I'll second that. Second Johnson.
Okay. Seeing no hands for discussion, we'll take a vote. I'm sorry. You want to say something? Selectman Emery?
Yes.
Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Hashmi?
Abstain.
Okay. And Selectman Edinburgh?
Edinburgh, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes. That's 4-0-1, 5 being present. And if folks could get in sooner than later, before the 24th, you said, Wendy?
yes,
Great.
this week would be good.
Yep,
Okay.
we'll get it done.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. You're officially dismissed. Have a good night.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Next agenda item, I see our Recreation Director. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for being patient while we catch up here.
Okay. No worries.
So you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. So a couple of meetings ago, when you guys created the gift account for us to accept a very generous donation from Nelson Ball to construct 4 more pickleball courts on Lyman Street, we all kind of agreed that we'd like to name the courts after him as a way to recognize him as a donor and as just an overall enthusiast of the sport. And so I'm just here tonight to propose after him, very simple, just Nelson Ball pickleball courts. And I believe you guys need to vote on that.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Syed.
Second that motion, Emery.
We should have the full motion read into the record. Do you have that in front of you, Syed?
Hold on, I'm going to try to see if I can. Sorry, of course, my computer is. Just give me a second.
Yep.
Give me a second.
Only because it has a parcel ID, so you should probably.
Right, just give me a.
Yep.
I can read it.
Yeah, if you could. Wouldn't.
Okay.
Sure. I move to name the newly constructed pickleball courts located on Lyman Street, identified as Assessor's Partial ID as 34-98, the Nelson Ball pickleball courts.
Okay, thank you very
I
much.
second.
I think we have, so we have Syed and Lee as,
Oh, okay.
that's okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
I third.
Any discussion or questions, comments?
I have a question for Jennifer. I didn't look on the map, Jennifer. Are they, hold on a sec, sorry. Are they, where are they in relationship to the one that we already built across from Chauncey?
They're right next door. So we had built originally 4 pickleball courts and a tennis court.
Right.
And after almost a year of review, there was hardly anyone playing on the tennis court. But there was always a wait for pickleball. So the tennis court is no longer there, and that tennis court's been turned into 4 pickleball courts.
Oh, okay. So you didn't have to appropriate more property. You're able to use what
Nope.
you already had. Wonderful.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure Earl's story is helping you with that.
Oh yes, big help.
Thanks, Earl.
I was
Yep.
I was over there this morning. They looked great, and there's quite a crowd playing, and I know they're anxious to have those opened. I did have a question regarding the motion and just the courts. So really semantics, but just so we're clear, are all the courts being named, or the 4 that were just opened?
I was thinking the entire property, just because they're all in one. I mean, you were there. It's all kind of one. It'd be hard to kind of name
I agree. And particularly when you're
some and not the other. Yeah.
Right, and when you approach the courts, in order to get to the set of the new 4, you have to walk by all the others. So
right,
I don't know that folks would see any sort of signage there. So,
yeah.
Right, so is there a sign planned?
Yes, I have us penciled in. I knew that this would be okay, but I didn't want to order anything in case it didn't happen. So yeah, we're penciled in to get a sign ordered and made and installed.
Excellent. Great.
Shelby?
Okay. Yes.
There is a picture. I just can't display it, and I don't know if Alan's able to display it. Jen had taken a picture of the court. Sorry to put you on the spot, Alan.
Is it in our?
I don't think I have that picture.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it was in our packet, was it?
It wasn't in the packet. We just got it.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, we have a motion and a second. We'll call a roll call vote. Selectman Johnson.
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, yes.
Selectman Hashmi.
Yes.
Selectman Emery.
Emery, yes.
And Marshall, yes. 505 being present. Thank you very much, Jen.
Thanks.
Great. Very excited.
Me too.
Okay. Enjoy your evening. We continue on. All right. As I mentioned, when we read the agenda to start, we'll be passing over item number 8. So that moves us into the presentation of the revised capital plan policy. Christy, do you want to take it away?
We've been talking about the need for the town to update our capital planning policy and also our capital planning process in terms of making sure that we are including all of the town's capital needs into one document. So previously, the capital planning process typically considered mostly vehicle and equipment replacement. Though the capital planning policy also spoke to building projects and land acquisition and other things like that. So we started with, and when I say we, I mean Kim, worked really hard on looking at other communities' capital planning policies and really creating more of a comprehensive policy that explains the need for capital plan and talks about how we'll move forward. And then our process, which is not before you for consideration, but is part of what we've been talking about. Our process is really going to be more inclusive of the building projects, the water and sewer projects, things like that. So we've already sort of prepared the department heads that we intend to have all of that in one document so the town can get a full picture of our capital needs going forward. So before you tonight is the policy. Kim's going to go through it with you. We're not asking for you to vote on it this evening. We just are going to run through the policy, and then we would ask you to vote at a future meeting, and we would also bring it before the advisory finance committee. We have already brought it to the finance team. So the town school finance committee finance team has seen it. We had a meeting a couple weeks ago and they supported it as written. So Kim, I'll let you go through it.
Okay, thanks. So really what the capital planning policy sits within our broader comprehensive fiscal management policies. So it's one policy within that packet. What I did, what you had in your packet, the way we updated it didn't really lend itself to doing sort of a track changes. So you just had a whole new document. And really what this is, it really is the ground rules for how we approach capital planning. And as Christy mentioned, what we were trying to do is get to a more robust and comprehensive process where all potential projects from all possible sources that meet the definitions of capital expenditures would be included. One of the key things is this document, the planning process and the resulting document, it gives us an important planning tool for financial management. It's also an important communication tool. And so some of the changes that we're proposing really address that it's part of the budget document, which, as you know, we're trying to make that more of a communication tool as well. So a couple of I think the highlights, because it is a 4-page document, I'm not going to read through the whole thing. But I think hopefully what you noted, because I think we stated a few times, that what we're intending to include are all anticipated projects identified by school and municipal departments looking out over a 5-year period. So this document is really a working blueprint. We're looking out at projects, and then we're also focusing on the sort of immediate upcoming fiscal year. That's the actual capital budget that would come forward to town meeting for approval. So again, we've identified what fits in the definition of a capital project, and those are laid out on the second page of your document. The capital projects are expenditures of at least $25,000. They're items that have a useful life greater than 5 years, and they have to be things that are beyond the scope of a department's normal annual operating expenses. And then we provided 6 categories of projects. Just quickly run through those: acquisition of land or real property, construction, expansion, or renovation of public facilities or infrastructure, equipment purchases or long-term leases, things like vehicles, technology, communications equipment, facility maintenance projects. So these are bigger things: roof repair, HVAC, larger electrical or masonry projects. And then we have infrastructure and maintenance projects that are things like street resurfacing and a lot of what you would think of as typical DPW infrastructure projects.
Kim, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm getting a message from Westborough TV, a little bit hard to hear. Can you speak up just a little bit more? Important topic, and thank you. That's okay. Thanks.
And then the final category would be planning, engineering, or design studies that would be important for helping us frame future capital projects. So that's a pretty all-encompassing categorization of projects. And then what we would also be looking to do is make sure that projects that are looking out, things can move around on the plan, but the idea is most of our big expenses, most of the time, don't just pop up quickly. These are all things that we can anticipate. And the whole idea behind the planning and why we're doing this is it's a more thoughtful and systematic identification of projects that hopefully means it's better use of our funds, because we're addressing things before they've reached the point where they're urgent, and often urgent means more expensive. One of the things we also talk about in the policy is the both what we'll be expecting departments to submit. We sort of just hit on the types of information we're expecting departments to provide. The process will remain the same as it has in the past. Departments will submit their capital project requests through our office. We're going to sort of increase the vetting and the review to make sure that they're complete and provide adequate information for the capital expenditure planning committee to make informed recommendations and around project priorities. One of the things we're going to do is definitely bolster how projects relate to other strategic initiatives. So for instance, we were talking about MVP tonight, we were talking about the master plan. There might be opportunities where some of these projects that we already have in our plan are meeting some of the goals or issues that come up in some of these other projects. And then lastly, the final portion of the policy touches on the funding of capital requests. And this has been slightly updated from what it was, but it's largely the same funding sources that we've looked to in the past. It talks about borrowing for projects of greater than 100,000 potentially. It also talks about using available resources, things like free cash, stabilization, retained earnings, things that fit within the general fund. And then, the idea here is as you start to map this out, and particularly as you go through the process over time and get on a replacement schedule and cycle, your sort of peaks and valleys are hopefully being leveled out to a sustainable funding, a sustainable funding picture, and being able to plan and match resources so that you don't get things really bunched up in a year and find yourself in trouble. So I think that's the highlights.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Kim. Yes, Ian.
I think the policy is great. Thank you. The one that kind of struck me, and I think it's important to have it in there, although I think it may be challenging, is the acquisition of land or other real property, because I think, as we've noted, a lot of that will come, I'd say, rather quickly. So planning 5 years or 3 years for something, may not be possible too. I think, as we've seen, you wouldn't want to lose our bargaining position by putting something out there that we want to acquire in 3 years, because that doesn't work. So I think having it there, I agree with, but I think it also should be just understood that there'll be many instances where something may come up that will need to be added to the capital plan at a what will seem like a late date, and there may be, as you said, it's kind of a process and a little bit of fluidity there. But that's just the one that struck me as one that may be more difficult than the others to properly plan for.
So land acquisition has actually always been in the capital plan, but we've never used it that way. This actually was a question that came up with the finance committee last night when we were specifically talking about the Eli Whitney property, because we are proposing to use all of the open space funds. And so I think related to the capital requests, we would be looking to the open space committee to be submitting a capital request. So casting a wider net, asking more departments and committees to submit these requests, potentially with a list of their priority parcels, and then also a request to start replenishing that fund. So the capital request might be, and whatever amount of dollars to put into an open space fund for a future acquisition.
I have a comment, Madam Chair.
Yep. Yes, Lee, please.
Great work. It's interesting to me. A lot of this structure was already there, but you certainly are refining it and making it more comprehensive. And I really appreciate that. And it was interesting to me, Kim, that you said you looked to other towns' plans to see what they might have that would benefit us in adopting. I just wanted to remember, though, that when we first started our capital planning project, Ken Sutton, who was on the finance committee at the time and was a very active and wise man, decided that we should have a capital acquisition plan. And I think that must have been 25 or 30 years ago. And at the time, I think we were one of the few towns around us that had started anything like that. So there's a wonderful heritage to this that just wanted to appreciate, even though no one from his family is living in Westborough anymore. But some of the older people will remember him. And I want to thank you, Kim, for moving that forward in such a thoughtful and comprehensive way.
Great. Thank you, Lee, very much. I did not know it had been in existence that long, so I appreciate the historical reference. Yes, Ellen, please.
So first off, excellent work to Kim and the finance team. A couple of comments at a very high level, is what I think discussed October, September of last year, or maybe September, October of last year in one of our meetings. We talked about the, sort of the breadth of the current capital plan, what wasn't being done, and the impact it might have on projects. So I think it'll be interesting to see in implementation how we keep this efficient. I know you mentioned it's been shared with the full finance team, which includes the school department. I would just, as this moves forward, just to understand in the evaluation process how this process doesn't interfere with things like the MSBA process as far as timing of activities. We've been very fortunate to have a team with our school projects, either for new construction or for major repairs, to get through the MSBA process very quickly and get us decent amounts of reimbursement or matching funds. And so I just wouldn't want this to slow down or interfere with those processes. Also similar with, and I know it's in the evaluation section talking about federal state mandates, maybe expand that to say or process. So, we're looking at sometime in the future getting money for library expansion and renovation. And would want to make sure that that work fits within the capital plan as required based on the timing that comes from the state for that project, is another example. I'm very impressed with the expansion of the funding component and the definitions there. I think it sets a really good tiered structure and expectations on where the funds for projects can come from too. So that was a great addition and expansion of the theme and of the process and the procedure. So kudos.
Great, thank you. Syed, any comments? We can't see you, so I don't know if you want to comment.
No, nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay. All of my comments have been echoed and supported here. So I do want to thank Kim and all of those behind the scenes who worked together to get us to this point. I think it's, we already had a great basis to start from, but I think this is, an improvement. The one thing I would note is I think that we haven't seen yet, and I know it will come, is whatever the, form or checklist that will follow, kind of that would be aligned with this revised policy, right? That the departments would be submitting.
You haven't seen it.
Right.
Right. Your vote would just be on the policy.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that would be an addendum to this, right? That would be referenced in some way.
We hadn't done that before, but we could certainly, before you vote, show you what we think it will look like.
Okay, I certainly would love to see it. Not necessarily my vote doesn't hinge on it. It's just, I would like to see it in, that there's a connection back to the policy. Great. Okay. So we're not taking a vote on this tonight. So there is still time if you want to review it, and if you have any other comments, we'll bring this back I'm looking for my notes. Hang on.
First meeting in September?
Yeah, I think the 8th, the meeting on the 8th.
Yeah, it would be, your first meeting in September. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So time to still review and comment, send that to Kim, and we'll have that on our future agenda. Great. Thank you very much, Kim. Okay. Okay, next agenda item is a discussion vote for right of first refusal for 112 Deacon Chuddock Way by our town manager.
So the board has considered a lot of these lately, but this exactly the same type of request where we have an affordable unit. They'd like to sell the affordable unit. DHCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, will work with the seller to find a qualified buyer so it would remain affordable. The town would need to decide not to exercise its right of first refusal at this time, and then the letter we submit reminds DHCD that they would have to come back to us were they unable to find not a qualified buyer. So we're unable to find a qualified buyer.
I make a motion that we waive the town's right of first refusal for 112 Deacon Shattuck Way.
Emery, second.
Or Lee
Okay.
can.
I've got Ian and Lee. That's who I heard first. Any comments, discussion?
Would you remind us where this is? I didn't look it up. Deacon Shattuck Way. What major road is it off of? If you don't have it off the tip of your tongue, I'll look it up tomorrow. That's okay.
It is. No, we'll pull it up. So others may be wondering. So if you're asking, others might be. It is off of.
It's by Hockomock Pond.
Yeah, it's off
It's
of
in the-
Gleason down in that
Redevelopment.
whole development. Yep,
Thank you.
Gleason and Townsend. Yep. Okay, thank you, Lee. So I'll call for a roll call vote. Selectman Hashby,
Yes.
Selectman Johnson,
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Emery,
Yes.
and Selectman Edinburgh,
Yes.
and Selectman Marshall 500, 5 being present. Great. Okay. As mentioned earlier, we are passing over item number 11 on our agenda, and that brings us to number 12, discussion vote to approve proposed legislation. Can't talk. Christy.
So as you remember at our special town meeting in January, the town voted to authorize the board to petition the legislature to allow the Commonwealth to sell us a small parcel of land that was intended to be conveyed to us during the disposition of the Lyman's School. This is that small parcel of land that is behind the DPW, where the DPW has already put improvements on the property. At the most recent town meeting, the town meeting authorized $5,000 for this acquisition so that the town could pay any associated costs, surveying, legal fees. And so our town council has been working with DCAM to create the legislation. And so I've received a final version, which is the one in your packet, to provide to our legislative delegation to ask them to file it. And so the board would just need to vote to approve the legislation as written. Basically, the town would, if the legislation were to pass, the town would be able to obtain the small parcel. We would have until December 31st of 2021 to acquire the parcel. And should the town choose not to acquire the parcel, by then they would be able to sell it to someone else. So.
Would you like a motion?
Yes, I would.
Okay. I move to approve the proposed legislation titled An Act Authorizing the Transfer of Care and Control of Certain Parcels of Land and the Conveyance of a Parcel of Land in the Town of Westborough, to provide for the acquisition of the off Oak Street parcel shown as parcel C-5, containing 0.31 acres, more or less, on a plan recorded in the Worcester Registry of Deeds in Plan Book 893, Plan 24, for general municipal purposes.
Emery, second.
Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none. Selectman Johnson?
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Hashmi?
Yes.
Selectman Edinburgh?
Yes.
Selectman Emery?
Emery, yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes. 5-0, 5 being present. Okay. We're passing over item number 13 on our agenda, and that brings us to our town manager report.
So just as an update on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which was mentioned earlier, there were 3 vacancies. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee met on August 6th and interviewed several applicants. And so they recommended and I appointed Ryan Nguyen, Imma Ness, and Shazia Majid to fill those vacancies. So they'll be part of the committee for their next meeting. We had a discussion at the last meeting about sending a letter to the legislative delegation about additional revenue sources. Chair Marshall and I had a discussion about the legislative delegation coming before you. That's something they typically do annually, and I think they were supposed to come right when COVID hit. And so we've invited them to come in September, and they're able to attend your September 22nd meeting. So we'll be able to have a discussion with them at that time about the discussion you previously had, and then any other items that the board wishes to bring up. We'll have an agenda item on your September 8th meeting to prepare for that discussion. The staffing study. So I had previously talked about presenting my recommendations for the implementation of the staffing study at your first meeting in September. However, with the timing of the October town meeting, and also the need to allow the finance committee and others to look through that, we talked about moving that up to your August 25th meeting, so next week. So you'll receive a memo from me later this week with my recommendations.
So Christy, we are meeting next week, because originally we had just had the one meeting in August, but we are going to meet.
Yeah, so we're meeting next week for that, and also potentially to work through the special town meeting date.
Okay.
Fall town meeting, we talked about this a little bit earlier, related to the workload in the town clerk's office, and then also our financial information that we have related to the first quarter of local receipts and the impacts of COVID, and then also the state budget, which has not been adopted. As you all know, town council, or as I mentioned, town council has advised that the board has the authority to move the October town meeting. And it could be to that November 9th date. I know you also received an email from John Arnold about a different method of moving the October town meeting. And so this would be proposed to be an agenda item on the 25th as well. Just so you know that these are on our radar, we've asked Chief Laurie to be prepared to come to one of your meetings in September to talk about the accreditation process and policy development. That was also part of an action item in the community statement that the board put out earlier this summer. And then we are also inviting our DPW director, Chris Payant, to come to talk about the road management plan, and then also to provide an update on complete streets. So that'll happen in September as well. And then these are just the department updates. Conservation Department continues to hold their meetings. Permits issued in July include an order of conditions for a subdivision on Harvest Way and a single family home on Ruggles Street. They've also been working on the town stormwater inspection program. They've also been working very closely with Steve Sloan and Marcus Silverberg related to the Belknap Street property and application of the land grant. So that was submitted in early July. Also, they are working on acquiring about 25-acre parcel of land at 140 South Street. That'll actually be on an upcoming agenda for the board, but this is part of a 2-lot subdivision. Under the Department of Public Works, Chris Payant wanted to publicly thank Kyle Rutkowski and Sean McDowell for their efforts in working on the town's drainage structures. He also wanted you to share that the DPW had been awarded a grant through Mass DOT Shared Streets and Spaces Grant to make improvements to pedestrian crossing sites. Paving that's going to be scheduled over the next six weeks include Thomas Newton Drive, Elm, Spruce, Pine, Green, West, Grant, and Belknap. So there's more details that can be found on the DPW website. I know they're working on making sure to communicate that out. They have also, the renovations to the town's water purification facility are complete. And then the Westborough Fire Department, they did receive a grant, for the Assistance to Firefighters program. So we were awarded $260,000, which is less than was requested. So this is related to the self-contained breathing apparatus. That came up at the June 20th meeting. That was on the capital plan. And so They were awarded the $260,000. It had previously been on the capital plan for $350,000. The chief is still working through what that delta will actually be. Just as an FYI to the board, and you can see it was actually repeated, so it's further down in the town manager report. If we do move the town meeting to November, we would like to have this request on the upcoming special town meeting warrant in order for the chief to be able to make this purchase in time to receive the equipment and get it ready for the firefighters to use by the end of the calendar year. The department has also begun working on updating their comprehensive emergency management plan. And they are working with MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, to acquire PPE for the fire and EMS at no cost. With the library, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but the library provided an update on the grant. So the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners has instituted a 1-year pause in awarding construction grants for new projects. They will award payments to projects that are currently underway, and any money left up to the $20 million cap will go to Grafton and Boston, who forward funded their projects but are below us on the waiting list. This means we will likely be awarded our grant in July 2022 instead of July 2021 as we had anticipated. So that is the end of my report.
Speed reader. Lots of information in there. A lot of work being done.
Very good, Christy.
Day to day. Very impressive by all the departments. Okay, with that, we'll move into issues and correspondence from the Selectmen, and I'll start with Selectman Emery.
I don't really have anything, Shelby. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. You're helping with the
Oh,
timeline
thank
of the
Cable.
meeting. Thank you.
We'll thank Cable for having us on. I don't know who's actually doing it tonight, if it's Karen or somebody else.
It is
But
Karen
thank-
behind the scenes.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Selectman Hashmi.
I just wanted a couple of comments. One, it's worth remembering that today was the passage of 100 years ago, the passage of the 19th Amendment, which was ratified on August 18th and was then certified on law on August the 26th, which technically granted the women the right to vote. However, the 19th Amendment did not extend this right of voting to women of color, and that required another almost half a century's worth of struggle for them to get that right. And now one of them is a candidate for the second highest office in the nation. The other thing I just wanted I just wanted the board not to forget, or the residents of the town not to forget, that, over 900 healthcare workers have died due to COVID-19. A majority of these were identified as people of color. A third of them were born outside of the United States. I know people look at numbers, but I think people forget to look at faces, and I think it's just important to remember that. And then on a more stuff from the town, we had spoken earlier about the Lyman Street sidewalk. I had reached out. There were concerns from some homeowners that they hadn't been notified about the proposed plan. I had reached out, haven't heard back. So I just want to make sure that someone follows up with the homeowners about that. And go ahead.
Christy, yep.
So I know that they had sent out, they had communicated with the homeowners. They also had a site walk.
No, they didn't. Christy, they communicated with one homeowner who then they told a neighbor. There's been no communication from the DPW that has gone out to the homeowners on the route of that sidewalk. People saw the markings, and they were like, "Hey, what is this?" So let me be again clear. There's been no communication from the DPW to the homeowners on the route.
That's not my understanding. So I think that we need to follow up.
Yeah, please.
I did see the markings as I was driving by today with the stakes.
Yeah, and those things showed up, and people are asking me like, "Hey, what is this?" And so if you could please.
Great. Anything else, Syed?
No, that is it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Selectman Johnson.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a couple things, and I don't remember if we hit this before, and if we did, I apologize. That's my old age, but with the latest the storm that came through and just kind of the work done in town, but really with the power company and the work they did. I just wanted to highlight again the I'd say tremendous work done over the last number of years between the town and specifically National Grid in this instance, but other of the power service providers to really provide us a service to the town of Westborough that has worked well for our residents. I just wanted to say thank you again, police, fire, town manager's office. It's just a relationship that's been built and it works well. And I think our residents definitely appreciate it. We have, no one likes to lose power, but in looking at things happen, we tend to get that power restored. We know for that storm, they had crews positioned here in town, ready to move once wind subsided. So it's just kudos to the town staff, emergency personnel that continue to work on that relationship. It just doesn't happen magically. So thank you to that. And the second piece I had just was I had personally been contacted by two of our legislators, other selectmen may have as well, regarding some concern over comments that the legislative delegation, our legislative delegation had been silent in terms of the Eversource negotiations. And, they would just wanted to remind me, and I guess us as a town, as a board, that they have been working with us. They have participated in discussions, have sent that material. So just, it was just something that came up as concerns on their part that there had been comments made that the legislative delegation was not participating in these discussions, and they just wanted to correct that they have been involved and have been working with the town. So I just wanted to bring that up as a kind of correspondence that had come, and just to note that up. And that is all that I had.
Thanks very much, Ian. Alan.
Okay, a couple of quick things. One, I received several correspondences after the last storm with compliments to DPW. The number of crews that were out early that next morning, clearing debris off the roadways, off sidewalks, making sure that catch basins were still open and usable and not covered with debris. So it's not often I get a full stream of texts or emails so early in the morning, but I received probably about a dozen within about a half-hour time period as people were on their way to work or out and about on their day. So kudos to the DPW for their great response. Since our last meeting, as part of my role on the Economic Development Committee, I attended a mass econ forum on transportation. Typically, these look at the state of strategic projects and provide a semi-annual update. This one was very focused on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. In short, it was a mix of good news and bad news. The bad news is that with people working from home, ridership and therefore fares on public transportation statewide, as well as tolls on the Mass Pike and in the tunnels have dropped significantly, which is at this point becoming a concern for Mass DOT for future projects as those help fund capital projects. They are also seeing a dramatic drop in gas tax revenues. And so those go into, really affect future, not just the operating budget, but future capital projects. The upside, the lack of traffic, not just by cars, but on commuter services, as well as air travel, has dramatically reduced the cost of certain capital projects in that they're able to do lane closures during the day without impacting traffic. And daytime construction is much faster and much safer and much less expensive than overnight work. And this has included work at Logan Airport on the runways and terminals, work on the T, MassDOT projects, and many others. It was noted that while auto traffic is down a little bit more than 50%, the number of accidents with injuries and fatalities has remained constant. The assessment is that speed, given the roads are empty, people are speeding, they're not taking as much care at junctions and intersections, and so our accident rate is actually up significantly, and there's some initiatives at the state level to address those as well. And so that's sort of the highlights of that meeting. And that is all I have.
Great. Thank you very much. Lee, you had comments?
Thank you. Yes, I have a question. I wonder if Christy or Kim could find out for us. Could we find out if our post office has been affected at all by the president's changing funding? Have we lost any sorting machines in the system that Westborough uses? Have they had to reduce their staffing? Are they experiencing a overload, backlog of mailing? Could you just get us an update on that, Christy?
Sure.
So we aren't bothering them, calling them individually. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Okay, great. So a couple items. Let me just go to the first one. So I want to let folks know that Westborough Connects is organizing a pen pal program. They are trying to connect people in Westborough from two different age groups, those that are 50 to 69, connected with those who are 70 and above. And if folks may recall other conversations about Westborough Connects, but their whole sort of mantra and mission is about creating a kinder, connected, more resilient community. So this group of folks here in town thought that it would be a great way to connect folks through traditional handwritten letters, possibly email if that was the preference of the folks that get matched up. Right now they have probably about 25 folks ages 50 to 69 who are ready to write. They are looking for those 70 and older who want to participate. And the participation details, it's basically a program they're going to run from October to January. And they're asking for both pen pals to commit to writing 2 letters during that time. You want to write more, that's great, but that would be the minimum commitment. And if you want to continue it on after January, then all the better. If you are interested in participating, you can contact Westborough Connects through their website. You can also contact Janet Hart. She's heading the initiative, and she's actually given me permission to give her phone number. I'm hesitant to do that, but she's given me permission, and that's 508-330-5452. None of the information that you share in terms of your name, address will be shared outside of this program or for any other purpose. But I think it's a great way. And I've actually had a conversation with a senior today who was like, what a great idea, and I'd love to participate. So if you know someone, let them know about the program and see if we can get them to engage. I want to take a moment to acknowledge an unbelievable amount of work that has been done recently, certainly by our teachers, school committee, the administration, as they navigate and try to understand how to bring students back to school. They've had a lot of meetings. For anyone that watched their meeting on Monday night, it was a very emotional vote by the school committee. And I just want to, thank them for their dedication. As Alan mentioned earlier at the beginning of the meeting, it really takes a village for the town to work and function, and a lot of volunteer hours and a lot of paid hours, and all coming together with unbelievable thoughtful communications and coordination and behind the scenes work. So thank you to everyone in that group for all their work. Alan, you must have been reading my mind because on the accidents, although I didn't know that as a statistic, one thing I have noticed, it seems that, I don't know that COVID has brought around sort of what seems like a free pass for folks to use their cell phones again while driving. And I just want to remind folks that just because the roads aren't maybe as crowded, there is still a law that Massachusetts is now hands-free. So if you have a message, pull over. There's lots of empty parking lots right now. Pull over and send your message, or just put the phone down, or make a hands-free call, because I see a lot of people of all ages using their phone in an unsafe way. And finally, on a brighter note, I mentioned that pickleball earlier. I happened to be over there this morning, and I was speaking with Earl Story, and he mentioned that how much use those courts are getting. Really a wide range of folks out there playing, and lots of members from our new Del Webb at Chauncey Lake community are there and meeting people, and so it's kind of in what seemed to be like kind of flat days of the pandemic. It was nice to see folks, and some playing with masks, playing pickleball. So sort of a bright spot. And I think that's it. Christy, did you? Yes, Christy.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to let the board know that we did follow up on that Eversource presentation with a letter to Eversource explaining exactly what we were looking for in terms of information, and that was copied to the delegation. As Ian said, I've certainly been in contact with the representatives related to this issue, and they've been very interested in watching this as it goes forward. Also, Shelby and I went to the Finance Committee last night to discuss the acquisition of the Whitney property, and the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to support the acquisition. So that's all.
Great news. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll tag on just one more point on Eversource, and that work continues. Just to remind the public that Selectman Hashmi is this board's delegate to a work group subcommittee led by Christy that includes others to work on that initiative. And so it's even though the public hearing seems like ages ago, our work and concern regarding that project continues. And I do want to thank the delegation for being very involved in concern about Westborough's concerns. So thanks for bringing that up, Ian. Okay, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, Ian and Alan, roll call vote. Selectman Emery.
Emery, yes.
All right, Selectman Johnson.
Johnson, yes.
Selectman Hashmi.
Yes.
Selectman Edinburgh.
Yes.
And Selectman Marshall, yes, 5-0, 5 being present. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Good job, Shelby.
Thanks.
Good job
Thank
on
you.
keeping us on target there.
Bye.
Bye.